Is by Derek Webb. It was during my second year of secondary school that I first met Is. Mr. Gregory, our form master, swept into our classroom like a great black bat one morning with Is in tow. We didn't see her at first because she was so tiny, even though she was 12. Or maybe she was cowering behind Mr. Gregory, who really could look very frightening with his black cape on. All the masters at our school wore these capes. Not many teachers do now, of course, but this was in 1972, and things were very different then. "Good morning, boys and girls," Mr. Gregory wheezed, and his lips drew back as he spoke, exposing his horrible yellowing teeth. None of us in Class 2F knew why Mr. Gregory didn't go and see a dentist with his teeth. Maybe he couldn't find one brave enough to peer into his mouth. I certainly wouldn't have liked to be a dentist coming face to face with Mr. Gregory's molars, I can tell you. Nevertheless, we all chanted back at him in unison. "Good morning, Mr. Gregory." "I bring you a new girl," exclaimed Mr. Gregory, as if he was bringing sacrifice to some ancient ritual, which, come to think of it, he was. Is scurried forward like a rabbit, her tiny eyes darting everywhere before her. She looked so pathetic and wimpish that most of us couldn't help giggling at the sight of her, until old Gregory yelled out, "Quiet! I will not have this behaviour in my class," he bellowed, and the vein on his neck grew bigger and redder, and even more disgusting than usual. Mr. Gregory, on a bad day, was enough to send shivers through the toughest nuts in the whole of St. Leonard's School. Even oiks like Wilkins up in the sixth form knew not to cross him. For the newcomer to our class, standing there feebly in front of this great bull of a man, it must have been a truly terrifying experience. Mr. Gregory had by now mounted the podium on which his desk was perched, and he lifted his great carcass onto the top of the desk and sat there with one foot on the floor and the other dangling loose. "This is Isabel Williams," Mr. Gregory continued, indicating Is with his foot. "She is joining us today, and I want you all to make her welcome. Understood?" "Yes, Mr. Gregory," we all muttered, with varying degrees of enthusiasm. "Good. Right, Isabel, you can go and sit yourself down at that empty desk next to Robert Morgan there." And he actually nudged Isabel towards me with the tip of his shoe. She sat down quietly, and Mr. Gregory went through the morning's ritual of doing the register, with everyone calling out, "Yes, sir," as their name was read out. When he got to Williams, there was no answer, and Mr. Gregory repeated her name more loudly. Still she didn't respond, and this time Mr. Gregory accompanied his shout of "Isabel Williams" with a thwack of a metal ruler on the desk. Isabel jumped at this and answered in a small trembling voice, "Yes, sir." "I'm so glad you're awake, Isabel," replied Mr. Gregory sarcastically. He ticked the register and then continued to the last boy. "Wilson?" "Yes, sir." "Good." The book was slammed shut and pushed across the desk, and we all filed out to the school hall for assembly.